not there. Not just covered.
Thank you.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order at 5:37. Clock's slow.
31 on my computer. All right.
Fine. So, do we have any motions with regard to the agenda?
No.
Motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Have any discussion in public? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Let's have the flag salute.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, next item is approval of district calendars, 2017 to 18, 2018 to 19, and 2019 to 20. Does anyone have any comments on the calendars?
I do.
You
Okay.
don't have the amended one?
Yeah, we submitted, the WTA surveyed all of our members, and the response coming back was about 75% in favor of this week off in February. And so that's what I submitted for each of the 3 years. If you look at the calendars, it's a long stretch between the Christmas break and the spring break. And it was just 75% of the people wanted that 5 days off instead of the 4-day weekend. And the calendars I presented would move the year, a week later in June, but then we'd start later in August. And so there's a little beauty in that because it's usually a lot hotter in August than in June. And so I submitted them, and the recommendation, we didn't really have a conversation about that. And so anyway, that's the WTA input.
Are calendars a negotiable item?
You basically put them out and talk about them, and I submit them to you. And it's 50-50 on districts who have a week in February and don't. I talk to lots of folks, parents. I talked to CSEA, they didn't have it in their calendar. The issue for me really comes down to you're either going later in June or earlier in August. Well, we're not air conditioned in Brookside, we're not air conditioned in the high school and most of it, and the buses aren't air conditioned, and it just seems like June 14th is way too late to have seniors graduating. I just think that's this is a calendar that's, I don't know how long you've been in place with it, but it's been a couple years. This is basically a replica of what's happened the last couple years. And
As far as the parents I've talked to, they're happier with the new calendar, just because daycare becomes an issue, having a week off in February and a week off in April. That gets to be hard when you're working, there's no one home with the kids. So, but I don't know, if people don't wanna agree to it, we could certainly, I would say a parent survey would then be my next vote if we don't if we're not happy with it, but.
yeah, I think it's, the later you go, I think it's more problematic I think August, or for 14th of June is really late to have graduation. It's really late.
The calendar here, you've got basically 3 years for the calendars, am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, are we voting on them for 3 years? Okay.
Yeah, what did you vote on, 2 years before or 3 years? I think it's always a 3-year cycle.
But not always, no. We used to go 1 year at a time, and then we decided to go 2 years, and somehow it got up to 3 years, so.
Okay, any other comments?
This talks about the trimester system.
It talks about all kinds of stuff. We already use that, and there's a trimester grading that's going on already in middle school and Brookside and the others.
Okay.
Yeah, so they already have those grades and those grading schedules in place. This is, and again, like I told you folks, I'm here all the time anyway, so calendars are not top on my list. But I just think that's CSEA, parents who talked with me about it, and I talked to some parents, I solicited a group. You know, they're,
Is this something we have to do tonight?
what's the time frame?
I mean, can we do a parent survey? I would not be adverse to that.
I wouldn't either. I mean, I just worry, I mean, our last parent survey, we had, what, 12 responses from the entire school? I mean, that's my only concern. Is
No,
that are we
no.
gonna get enough responses?
Yeah, other than just a couple of teachers, I've not heard from anybody about the calendar.
Right.
They're just usually approved in December, so that's why it's before you tonight, but.
And I didn't hear from any teacher, other than John and I's discussion about it, and there are other days in the calendar where you could free up time in February, but you have to make those decisions if that's usually centers around Christmas break and when you take spring break and all those kind of things.
I mean, I
just-
personally am happy with this calendar and happy to approve it tonight, but
Is there any
I don't know how other
stopping
people
us from
feel.
revisiting this again next year?
Nope.
Next year? Oh, in January?
Rather than looking at a 3-year program, we could look at this again next year?
Yeah, that's
Doesn't matter to me.
just approve one.
Like I said, I'm here, it doesn't matter.
John, would that be a reasonable compromise?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's the way I agree with Alex. Let's proceed to vote on the calendar for the upcoming year, which is 2017 through 2018. And we'll take up the next December, we'll take it up again.
Next December?
Yeah, that's my
But
motion.
let's get
We
a
ca-
parent survey out.
Oh, next December would be too late.
No, they're
So
talking
we're
about
gonna
approving
approve-
next year's calendar,
This one.
just the first year.
Yeah, we'll just approve the
Oh,
first year.
Oh,
That's-
so only doing 1 year?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
They're talking about 17, 18 calendar.
Okay.
But sometime around February, where we normally would have the week off, you know, maybe that's the time to send out a survey.
I
to
think the
parents.
time to really do it is at parent-teacher conferences, because that's actually when you get,
That's true, that's good.
that's when you get well, except for high school and middle school is kind of, maybe at a football game, we could do the high school parents, I'm trying to think of a time when you get a majority of high school parents together.
I'd be interested, I mean, as far as high school goes, I would also be interested what the kids think. When it gets to the high school, it's, I think, less of a daycare issue and more of a, you know, do the kids have summer jobs that they would for longer? Would they rather have time off? I mean, I'd be interested, kid-wise, at the high school level. Not as much kid-wise younger than that, but.
No senior's gonna vote to get out on the 14th, I can tell
I
you.
don't think so either.
They would vote for the 14th of May.
Okay, do we have any public comment? Paul?
Well, just to add a little background to this, 2 years ago is when it switched over to no February break, no week off in February. And that was because the then superintendent didn't care for a week off in February. And the idea was that they were just gonna try it for a couple of years and then take it back to the membership, because at that time the membership was half and half. And so that's a lot of why it was, that you should be aware that now 75% of the teachers here prefer that it is a week off in February. So it was set up to be a short-term deal, not a forever thing anyway. It had been a week off in February for at least 10 or 12 years
I think
or
it was
more.
Jim Roberts, wasn't it?
Excuse me?
I think Jim Roberts started it, didn't he?
Yeah, but it was a long while back.
But we started earlier in the year,
We
and we
do
still
that
ended,
too.
the first week in June.
Right. Yeah, but that'd be, it'd be a week earlier in August with in-services on the first day.
And that's the only way I could see that working.
Right, you have to choose. either go later in June or earlier in August. That's basically how it plays out.
I mean, I personally have to take a pretty major pay cut to take a week off in February, because I can't work that week. I have to take my kids, because I can only fly out with grandparent for one of those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that gets difficult to take a week off in February, I think, versus a 4-day weekend. So, I think that's why I'd be
There's a
interested.
4-day weekend already.
Right,
in there.
yeah. So, I would be interested in parents, how other ones handle it. I mean, I don't know what our percentages are, you know,
Well, out of all my
households
years-
that both are working or not, so.
Yeah, lots of them take vacations in February because there's less crowd. And all of my years though, I've only had like 3 independent studies in February, which I would have normally not had.
It was originally set up as a ski week. That was the original
That's when you had a
justification
different
for it.
principal at the high school.
What's that? What's that?
You had a different principal at the high school, was,
So, do we have a motion?
I will move to approve only the 17-18 school calendar.
Do you have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None?
So with that, we can hopefully direct staff to conduct a survey, parents, and
Okay.
kids at the high school.
We now have the annual audit report. I understand the auditor is here tonight.
Step up to the plate.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Good evening. I want to thank you first for having me here tonight. My name is Michael Ash. I'm a partner with Christie White Associates. We're an accounting firm in California, and we specialize in K through 12 and charter school district audits. I would say we have about 100 school districts that we audit up and down California, and I personally am involved with about 40 of those different audits. So I see a lot of different districts and a lot of different counties, as far north as here, and then I actually live in San Diego, so as far south as San Diego and pretty much everywhere in between. So we see a lot of different districts. So what is our role as an independent auditor? So you're required by the state. The state requires every school district and charter school in California to have an audit. And the audit consists of 3 opinions. So the first opinion is on the financial statements themselves. So that's the audit report is as of June 30th, 2016, and for the year ended, so from July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2016. The second thing is federal compliance. So because you spend, this year the threshold actually went up, because you spend over $750,000 in federal money during the year, we have to do what's called a single audit, and we give an opinion on that. And then finally, the third thing is called a state compliance audit. So each year, the Education Audit Appeals Panel and the state controller get together, they put out an audit guide, and we have to look at all those different type things. So anything from attendance, instructional minutes, are you conducting your instructional materials hearings, is your SARC accurate, all those types of things that we look at. So I think the best snapshot of what our auditor's results are is on page 78 of the report. I know it's kind of in the back, but I think that provides the best summary. So the first section is on the financial statements. So that is your financial statements, and you'll see the type of auditor's report issued is unmodified. That's the best opinion that you can possibly have. So that means, in our opinion, these financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects. An audit always has a materiality threshold in, and what that is there are quantitative factors that we use, but is there anything that would make a reasonable user of the financial statements make a different decision if that weren't right? So an unmodified opinion means that we're backing what's in here. We're saying our opinion, this information is fairly stated. Along with that, we have to look at your internal controls. So because you're a school district, we have to do your audit under what's called government auditing standards. That requires us to look at your internal controls over financial reporting. Now, we don't audit your internal controls, but we have to look at them within the scope of our audit. If we do find anything that's significant or a material weakness, we are required to report it. So we do have one significant deficiency related to that, which I will go over. And then no non-compliance material to the financial statements, which is also good. The second section is your federal awards. This is the single audit I was talking about. This section, everything in here is perfect. We had an unmodified opinion, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies. You'll see we looked at your Title I. There's a whole calculation that we have to do to determine which grants we have to test each year, and it rotates. And And you're a low-risk auditee because you haven't had any audit findings in the last 2 years, which is really good too. So federal awards, the best possible. State awards, also an unmodified opinion. We did have one significant deficiency related to state awards too, which I will go over. So there's a snapshot of what we're looking at. One other thing with your financial statements, this is, you know, they report the funds to you every time they come in. So the general fund, the building fund, bond interest and redemption fund. These financial statements include that as well as a long-term focus. So all your capital assets and long-term liabilities, which aren't required to be recorded in your funds, those are also recorded in here. So if you go through the core statements, you'll see government-wide statements as well as the fund statements that you're used to seeing every time they present. So, and everything in this report is in here. It's required to be in here. So it's either something from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, from the federal government, from the state government. I know it's a lot of information, and sometimes it can be very hard to understand, but I hope I've summarized exactly what our role and what our opinions were. If you flip with me over to page 79, you'll see the first audit comment we had, and it was related to ASB. And this is very common. I would say 2/3 of the districts have ASB findings. It's an area that's very hard to control. There's a lot of cash that goes through it. It's offsite, it's not centralized. You're dealing with a lot of times receipts, so you're dealing with cash. Anytime there's cash involved, there's always risk. Not a lot of money going through your ASBs usually, but when you're dealing with cash, a lot of risk. So we did have some cash receiving issues at your high school and your middle school. The good thing is that I've spoken with Mark and Tanya. This has already been fixed. It's already been addressed in 16, 17. We don't anticipate there being this finding in here in your next year's audit report. So to me, the most important thing with findings, they do happen, comments do happen. It's how do we address them? Do we have a strong district response, and are we taking care of them? And in this case, I believe that we are.
Can I just interject for a
Yeah,
second?
sure.
Most of the ASB issues had to deal with athletics. Because we were taking
Gate receipts.
donations, gate receipts, all kinds of money was flowing in without proper POs, without double counting of the money. There were lots of issues. Part of the reason we put together an athletic budget was to resolve this issue. So now when we have athletic expenses, they're run through the district office, through purchase orders. So we have internal controls for that. Secondly, is ASB is designed only for fundraising that goes directly to the kids. So if you guys are a basketball team and you go out and do a fundraiser, that goes into your ASB. That doesn't buy basketballs and pay for referees. That money that you fundraise is supposed to be spent on you. So if it's warm-ups with your name on it or whatever, that's ASB. The jerseys you play in, that's us. So ASB is very clear on what should be done and not done in it. We didn't fund athletics as a district. We had to fund athletics as a district, or we're gonna, this finding's been here for multiple years. Okay? And it's a problem area, not because we think anybody did anything wrong. It's just untrackable, it's not acceptable out of accounting practice. And so we have fixed that. We've got that in place with the middle school and the high school. They both have ASB accounts. Tanya's worked with both of the folks. We have their accounts. Now people know what's ASB, what's not ASB. We've made all the clubs whole, by the way. A couple of them were in deficit. So for example, our cheerleading coach inherited a $2,500 deficit. Well, that's not okay to be the new cheerleading coach. Oh, by the way, you gotta do $2,500 in fundraising. We have resolved their deficits, so they're all starting back at zero. So all the taking money from here to pay that, because we don't have gate receipts yet, all that stuff's done. And so that is totally resolved at this point.
Thank you.
Page 80, no federal findings, which I talked about earlier. And then page 81, this is a state compliance finding related to your SARCs. So one of the procedures they asked us to do is to look at all the SARCs from the district schools. There are a few things that we check for, one of them being facilities conditions. So the district has a mechanism of preparing facility inspection tools for all their schools, and then that information gets posted on the SARC, which goes online and also goes to the state. And at Willits High School and Sanhedrin High School. There were some issues from, just discrepancies from what was posted on the fit forms to what actually made it to the SARC. So, it's a small state compliance thing, but it is something that we're required to report on. And
One more interjection.
yeah, I'll let Mark speak to what you've
As
done.
soon as I saw those,
Yep.
I met with the building principal. The fit comes from an inspection done by MCOE. And we know the response, we know that, it's not that we didn't pass or fail. It was listed as good instead of fair, that kind of thing. And so, when they transposed them, they missed about 3 of them between Sanhedrin and the high school. They have been fixed on our SARC since then.
What was the one that we got presented to us? Was that the FIT or the SARC that we had in
The
our
SARC.
packet? That was the SARC, okay.
Yeah. I have a hard time with the acronyms, but that's the SARC that you
Okay.
get.
They saw the fits also.
Oh,
Mhm. We saw them both, okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I
I
remember
think the
reading
FIT
through
was
them, but I
earlier in
didn't
the
remember
year,
what the
though.
title of it was, so,
Yeah.
okay.
But those have been corrected as well. And that's in the error world, that's a pretty minor thing. But again, that's the level of criteria that they check through.
And so I would say, overall, 2 important comments, but I would say, more on the minor side compared to what we see compared to other districts. So I would say of my 40, maybe 15% have no findings, but I would consider these definitely on the better end of findings. Nothing here, there's no funding impact to any of these findings and nothing that would cause me too much concern. One other thing I want to talk about before I move on, just an issue that's facing all school districts is the STRS and PERS unfunded pension liability and the impacts that's having on school districts. So, as you probably know and you probably heard and you're well aware of, STRS and PERS employer contribution rates are going up quite drastically over the next few years, and that's due to underfunded pension liabilities at the plan level. So what both of those plans have undergone is actuarial studies, saying here's the assets we have, here's the future benefits that we're gonna have to pay out. Both of them are underfunded. You've probably noticed if you've looked through these reports the last 2 years that there's a net pension liability that's been brought on to the district's books, which has happened to every entity statewide due to a new standard called GASB 68. I always tell my districts, don't really focus on the number of the net pension liability because that's gonna fluctuate each year depending on what happens at the plan level. What you do wanna focus on though is your increases that you're gonna be facing in STRS and PERS employer contributions over the next few years. Have you budgeted appropriately for those because it's going to cost quite a bit more to employ people as these next years go on and as those contribution rates go up. So that's just one big issue that's facing everyone statewide and that everyone's talking about.
Are those fixed? I mean, can you find out what those increases are?
Yes.
Okay.
You should.
It affects all districts exactly the same, in other words?
Yeah.
Yes,
Uh,
everyone who's in the plan, and what they base your liability on is your portion of the contributions as compared to the whole plan's contributions, but as far as the increases, those are gonna impact everyone the same.
So what you're saying is that we should take that into account, but that we're not individually under any greater
Correct.
risk than Ukiah or
No.
Correct.
Cloverdale
And these-
or San Francisco or
Yes, and
San
nothing
Diego.
about this has changed. The STRS and PERS, it's always been there. It's just there's a new accounting standard that required us to put this portion of the liability onto your books.
Is there any indication that the state is taking any action to address this?
Well, I think the biggest thing is they've increased the employer contribution level, hoping that that's going to cover up the shortfall. And we'll see over the next few years if that actually works.
We ran in exactly the same thing in Michigan where they used the GASB rules again to say you have to show it on your books even though it's not truly your debt. They wanted to minimize their debt picture by passing it out to the districts. But we do know the rates that it's going up. And that's the anticipated rate that they're gonna go up. They've already produced those.
So we don't have any choice but to
No.
budget
No.
those rates that are fixed. I mean, so it's not like something that we have to take account of.
It's like paying FICA.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
John, do you have a comment?
But there's also the employee contributions are going up.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my understanding is that it's going up, but if, you know, the stock market produces and stirs is financially more solvent than expected, then those increases could be lowered.
Absolutely.
Could be, yeah.
Could be, they're, you know. we
Yeah,
just-
they've done a
Okay.
projection just like we do, and, yeah, they could go up. I doubt they'll go down dramatically, but they could go down a little bit.
Yeah, so it is, that's what the state's involvement is to make sure that that's,
Absolutely.
we're solvent at the end of the day.
Right.
Correct.
Yep.
And then the last point I want to hit on, because you're doing your first interim budget tonight, I just want to talk about budgets and the role in the audit and how that plays a part. So one thing that we're required to look at is an entity's ability to continue as a going concern, which that means that you're still in existence a year down the line, 2 years down the line. Now, a few years ago, this was a lot worse and a lot more important because you had a lot of districts that were filing negative, quite a few more that were filing qualified status. Unfortunately, the economy has recovered somewhat, and we're in a little bit better of a position. So as auditors, we're always constantly looking at your budgets and looking at your future projections, just to see, from our perspective, if there's anything that would raise a red flag. The other thing that we have to do is, your fiscal year ended in June, but as you can see, this report isn't until December. So we're still required to look at that period from June 30th through now, just to make sure that there's nothing extreme or something that would need to be disclosed in here or possibly would impact these financials. So I've been through your first interim from an auditor's level, which means I've looked at it in a comparison to the 40 or 50 other ones that I've looked at across the state. And I want to say looks very normal to me. I didn't see anything in there that really stood out as being an anomaly. You're filing positive, anticipated positive for your first interim, which is great. That's what you want to see. Your deficit spending projected, but not at a huge deficit spending amount. Your reserve levels are adequate, somewhere in the 7 to 8% range projected, which is really good. I mean, the state requires 3, but as we know, things can change in a hurry. So 3 is probably not enough if we hit another fiscal downturn. So every district is a little bit different, how much reserve they think they need and how much they choose to take, but definitely I would recommend more than 3, which your district is in that position right now and looks like you will be. And then your STRS and PERS increases that I talked about are baked in there. I mean, that's really important, that we have those in there going 3 years out just to see what that impact is. And then also, the potential COLA, cost of living increases, adjustments going to go up, but your STRS and PERS increases, as of right now, projected to maybe go up just a little bit more than that COLA. So something to think about. But all in all, good financial position. I know you have needs like every district has. You have facilities needs, you have other needs, and with a school district, the reserve is a very tricky thing, right? I mean, because you don't want to have too much reserve because your job is to spend money on your kids, right? You want to spend money educating students and that type of thing. But at the same time, you don't want to put yourself in too lean of a financial position to where if something changes, if some certain money goes away, if you don't get money increases, then all of a sudden you're in a world of hurt. So that's always the balancing act that you as a board and you as a district, have to juggle. And but from what I've seen, your financial position looks pretty solid.
So we're talking about 8% reserve, 5% over what's required. The history of that is that we were told last year that we were deficit spending, and the board sequestered budgeted funds to reserves because we didn't have a good picture of what people were saying. I look at the year ending 2016 and I see that we had $21.8 million of revenue as opposed to the year before we had $18.7 million revenue. It was my impression, and believe me, I'm terrible at this. I got all my accounting training here at this high school, and I didn't do a very good job, or I didn't do a very good job learning. But to me, just sitting here hearing what I was hearing, on an issue by issue, it occurred to me that the state was funding us at a much higher level than they had maybe the prior 10 years. I look at our expenses were $20 million, $20.4 million, which is less than what our revenues were by almost $1.4 million. Whereas the year before, in 2015, we had revenue of 18.7 and the expenses of 19 million, so we were about $300,000 over. So when you say that we're deficit spending, what do you mean?
Well, you're projected to deficit spend in the general fund. Now you have to, I'm assuming you're looking at page 7.
Right.
Now that is government-wide too. Remember, that factors in all your different funds plus everything that has a long-term focus too. So I know like in 2015, you had to pay off your, didn't you pay off your van in 2015 doing that? So, so there are other factors that are baked in here other than just the general fund. There are other things that are in there. One big thing, your federal and state aid went up quite a bit year over year, as you're talking about. But I know there was a lot of one-time money that came in the last year. So it could have been something where, you know, it wasn't necessarily projected that you were going to get that money, and then, you know, you ended up getting it. You guys know your district better than I do. I don't know. I'm just looking at it from an audit perspective and how that impacts that. So, again, at the end of the day, you know, it's your district. You guys make the decision. I can give you what I see in recommendations.
So
but
can you show me where the general fund is in this?
Yeah, yeah, and so with the general fund, you won't see year-over-year projection. What you will see on page 15, you'll see the general fund did end up with $2 million more in revenues and expenditures last year.
Yeah, but really, I mean, isn't it the government, the whole budget that, I mean, it's this number, this page 7, which is really important. isn't
Well,
it?
I don't think you do a budget for government-wide. Like, you don't factor in depreciation expense, you don't factor in bond payments, that type of thing.
Right.
So, I would say yes and no.
So let's look at the general fund, that's on page 15. But we don't have a comparison with the year before. Okay.
Now, does this include restricted and unrestricted?
Yes.
Okay.
So we had $20.1 million of total revenues in the general fund and $18 million of expenditures. These are audited figures. I mean, this is
Correct.
just projections.
Correct. This is not a projection, this is actual. And, you know, the thing with a budget that you have to remember is a budget is only what is known at the time. You know, a good budget. You don't want to go in thinking, well, I think this is going to happen, so I'm going to budget this. You tend to budget with what you know, right? I mean, and so that's an important thing. So I would say, I mean, that's why you never see budgets coming in exactly, your actuals never come in exactly where your budgets are. I guess that's where I'm going with that.
So I'm looking, where's the deficit spending for 2016?
You did not deficit spend in 2016.
All right,
Yeah.
that's, I think that should be the headline.
You can make it that. Say that again, let him write that down.
With respect to the other agencies that you audit, what level of reserve do they typically carry?
Sure.
On average?
I would say I've seen as low as 3, but that tends to be with the larger districts. I've seen as high as like 40, but that tends to be with the really small districts. And I've seen everywhere in between. 40, yeah. But you're talking about a really like 15-kid, 20-kid district that's really
I
small.
see.
So it's a little,
Okay.
the percentage is a little bit skewed. I would say most fall between 6 and 15, somewhere in that range. The ones that tend to be on the higher end, a lot of your basic aid districts, because theirs can fluctuate more based on property taxes, right? So they're getting funded fully on property taxes. So if their housing base has a big hit, all of a sudden they're getting less property taxes. Now all of a sudden they might be in trouble. I would say yours are right about the average of where I see.
Can you, I mean, I'm just intrigued by what is a basic aid district?
A basic aid district is, so
Mendocino. Their
Similarly.
property taxes generate more revenue than the state guarantees per student.
So the state
And
guarantees
So their
per-
money stays there,
I
which
see.
is more than the state guarantees per kid.
Same as the classic.
yeah. So state guarantees a certain amount, property taxes, but if property taxes cover the entire amount, then they don't get any state aid essentially.
They have to do LCAP but they're really not involved in the LCFF funding, cause their funding is already in place.
Yeah, it's already there from the.
They
property
have to
tax.
say, we have X number of kids who qualify, and here's how we spend that money, but that money's their own.
That brings an interesting question to my mind. Do you have any, do you look at our bond program at all?
When your bond program is active, yes. So if you pass a Prop 39 bond, those bonds, that money has to go through an independent audit each year.
So we found, we did pass a bond, I don't know what kind, it was a Prop 38 bond or not, but we did pass a bond. And the first thing we found out is that the assessed valuation started to plummet in this county as a result of the, about 2010, from the 2008 property crash. Just, being a lawyer in this town and watching transactions, it's my impression that the assessed valuation has been skyrocketing over the last year and the last, over the last rising over the last 2 years. Do you take a look at that at all?
No. When we look at a bond program, we're only required to look at the expenditures and to make sure that those expenditures are spent on the projects that were outlined in the ballot language. That would be more like a financial advisor, legal, that's
It's a
not our-
bonding council who
not
would
our-
do that for you based on the county's assessed values that they give us for our district.
Can we just ask the county what the assessed valuation is for?
We can actually find out what our bonding authority is.
Well, not only our bonding authority, but Alex and I spent a lot of time on the bonds, and we found, if you wanna know how much $1 billion is, it's how much, it's the approximate assessed valuation of the Willits Unified School District. And all the property values as assessed adds up to just a little under $1 billion.
If you bought Willits Unified District, it would
But
cost
that's
you.
dated information today.
Right.
I would argue that should be significantly different by
Yeah.
today.
So we ought to just out of curiosity, see, if there's been a major change.
I was told not to bring up the B word, that's why I never said anything.
The B word.
Bond.
Bond word? Oh. Well, we don't have an active bond program, but aren't we making bond payments?
Yes, you still have bond payments that you're making that are coming from the property tax base over X number more years.
Who audits that? To see if that's working right?
So that's, if you look in your Fund 51, which is your bond interest and redemption fund, it actually is a major fund on yours. So if you look at page 15, so the revenue that comes in, that's the money that's coming in. It's not the County Office of Education, it's like the county tax assessor. And then you'll see you have your principal and interest payments down below that are being made each year on those bonds. And if you go back to your footnotes to your financial statements, note 8B, you'll see all your bonds left that you have to pay. So you have, looks like 4 outstanding series that are still there that go all the way through the year 2042.
Yeah, I saw that,
What page you're looking at?
That would be 38,
Yeah.
38, 39.
Page 39,
Shall
I
we add it
didn't,
up? I'll tell you what it is.
I didn't
for me.
bookmark it because I was,
Which I have districts that
You
go
left
to like
that part out.
2050 something now, and 20,
Do they?
yeah, there's some
42.
that go out, way out there.
That's essentially our mortgage that is paid by property tax.
Hmm.
If we wouldn't get that revenue, there just wouldn't be the tax assessment.
And the only thing I didn't know on here what it was is plant services. What falls under that?
That's like any like capital purchases that you would have, property, plant, and equipment. A lot of it goes into that function.
Chris,
yes, John?
I have a question about the projections. And can you talk about those?
I can tell you what I know. I probably don't know as much as
Okay.
the district does about
Are
that.
the
Okay.
projections, they're really
Interim.
in the first interim, right? They're not in the audit. There's no projections in this audit.
There's no projections in the
Well,
audit.
let's just hold that for a minute, John, 'cause
Okay.
let's finish on the audit
Yeah.
and see if anyone else has
Sorry,
any other
wrong
questions on
person
the
there.
audit.
On long-term debt,
Yeah.
are we making these payments out of our Yeah,
It com-
exactly.
It comes out of the bond interest and redemption fund, through property taxes that have already been committed to that,
Yeah.
back when the bond was issued, so.
Yeah, I just paid my portion of it.
Yeah. I have.
We don't handle that
Right,
cash.
it goes straight to the county and the county
Exactly,
does it.
yeah. And then we always just make sure that matches the schedules of what we have, and if for some reason it didn't, that would raise a red flag. I live in San Diego Unified, and they probably have 40 different bonds. When I get my property tax bill, like 40 different measures on there. There's so many of them, because that's a really large district, so I feel your pain.
Till 2041?
Yeah, they go out there pretty far.
So, any other questions, comments on the audit?
I just wanna compare our audit to other ones you've done, or where would you say we fall? Are we
As far as the audit itself and the findings and.
in the findings
Yeah,
and all?
I would say you're definitely in the top 25% of all the districts that I look at. Like I said, in my opinion, those two findings are very minor. Usually the ASB findings we have are much more, and you had no state compliance issues that had any funding impact, and then you also had no federal funding. So I would say top 25%.
In short, we're doing our business correctly and we're accurate.
From this report, absolutely. From
Which
what
is
I see.
saying something.
Yeah.
I mean, my biggest concern looking at it was the fact that these findings were the same finding as the year before and there was no change. So I was really happy to hear that you've already dealt with it, cause that, I mean.
We can't have that.
Right.
Yeah, there's no reason to have those findings.
The blanket, we're gonna provide more education and oversight as a statement to fix it.
No.
I was in the military, I wrote plenty of those. Oh yeah, we're gonna educate them better, problem solved.
Yeah.
So hopefully I'll be
So-
here next year,
Yeah,
and
and-
there won't be any findings.
Right.
Be great.
And we have the office personnel to do what we need to do. We have now an athletic budget in place, and we have a clear separation on what is and what isn't. And that's,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming and presenting this. I understand you're going to help us a little bit through the interim report, but we've never, the last 3 or 4 years, I don't think we've had an auditor here to go through this, and I think it's something we should, it's a tradition we should
I have never
continue.
not had an auditor come, because their depth and knowledge is way beyond where I'm at.
But I think it's important that the board and the public be able to, you know,
And-
once a year, have a chance to say, are these numbers real?
Right, and he should be able to say, board, your superintendent, business manager is screwing up, you need to fix it. And he would be obligated to say that if we were.
We, is it, I don't know if it's if GASB applies to the requirement for a budget committee to sit down and have a committee to talk with you over the budget findings or anything like there is for
Not
special districts?
usually.
Okay.
Usually what it requires us to do is just communicate to the board, which that's what I'm doing right now.
That's, yeah, this is more than adequate.
Yeah, great.
The thing I was surprised about that I've had in other audits, in fact in Montana and Michigan, is fraud assessment. I used to get a letter sent to my home address, and periodic employees throughout the entire district got sent home a letter
Sure.
and said, are you concerned about any type of?
Sure, and we do, you missed it because it was at our interim visit, but we don't send out a letter, but we do interview
Right.
at all the different school sites, that's part of our questionnaire. Always the
Good.
superintendent, the business manager, and we try to, if not every year, at least once every couple of years, to at least talk to one board member, over the phone, just to, see if you have any concerns, so.
Did you have a threshold of materiality?
We do, so, and what that is we have a professional standards, a calculation that it does. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you exactly what the number is, but there is a materiality threshold baked all through this. And so if something's underneath that scope, it's not that we ignore it, we still would bring it up, it just might not get adjusted in here, potentially.
I've litigated a few cases over audits, and I found out, I used to think that you checked every invoice, and
Yeah.
instead you just do a sampling.
Very-
And
yes.
apply a
Yes.
threshold
Yes.
against that sampling.
Yes,
and-
you're 100% right, yeah,
And
sampling is very.
The problem is, we don't know what it is. They come and randomly do it.
Right.
Sampling is very huge in an audit. Anytime you're doing an audit, there will be a lot of sampling involved, for sure.
And what really drives home issues when people complain about paperwork, they have to see the purchase order, who requested it, why it was requested, where did it go, what fund did it come out of, and did it really get paid? I mean, they do the entire process on something when they post.
Okay.
Okay, so
Well,
thank you.
thank you, and let's move on to the interim,
Definitely.
approval
Yeah.
of first interim budget.
Yeah, and I'm more than happy to stick around. I don't know, I don't know that I'll be able to provide any more
I didn't, Chris, did you guys,
input than, but
approve
I'm,
this
I'm
audit?
happy to
'Cause I
stick
didn't get
around.
that.
Oh, we should make a motion, we should have a motion is it approve or accept?
Accept.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept.
I'll second it.
Any discussion from the public? Any further discussion from the board? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? It's accepted. Move on to the approval of first interim budget, and so this is something that starts at tab C. It's an eclectic combination of spreadsheets and narrative, but
Well, I don't know if it's a different format than we used to get, but I found it much more readable than
Yes, I
before.
did too.
And I don't know if, maybe I'm just finally figured them out,
I
or if
don't-
it's a different format, but it seemed much more user-friendly, and I felt like I really could see the changes.
Better pictures.
Yeah.
This is the same format we've had for, I think, 2 years now.
Yeah,
Is it?
for Tanya.
Okay.
Tanya revamped it dramatically over what it was before. What it was before was very difficult to read. And now it's become, I wouldn't call it easy, but it certainly makes a lot more sense. I'll make the motion to approve, by the way. I'll start the ball rolling.
I'll second it.
okay. Does anyone have any questions? John?
Yeah, well, just looking at the audit, and, you know, what you were saying earlier was that, you know, the revenues were 21,869,000 and change. And the expenditures were 19,956,000, and so there was a surplus of 1,912,000, right? And that was with all the talk of deficit spending, and we were going to get taken over by the state, and et cetera. You knew that game that was going on. And so our ending balance went from 3,385,000 to 5,298,000. And I guess I'm, you know, it pisses me off, really, that our negotiations got tanked last spring because of numbers and a situation that was painted that wasn't correct. And it was a disservice to our district, all around. And I think that the board really needs to be aware of that and, you know, responsible for that. And when I look at that, and then we got 21 million last year, we just passed Prop 55, so we have this stable funding going forward. And then I see on this that our projected funding revenues is down to 18,800,000. So we're dipping, like we're losing $3 million in funding, even though our ADA is going up. And that's our projection. These are not real numbers. And so I just I guess my question is, how is that happening?
I think the explanation is on, I think the second or third page. It says, keep in mind that a budget is a multi-year projection, or just that, projections, not forecasts. Projections are expected to change and various factors change, but they are not predictions. Projections are the mathematical result of today's decisions based upon a given set of assumptions. Well, the suspicious word there is assumptions. Forecasts, on the other hand, are predictions of the future. There's a higher implied reliability factor than for projections. Projections will change anytime the underlying factors change. So I think, I mean, I appreciate the candor there, but I mean, what it's really saying is that, you know, this is all, you know, this is all manipulated.
It's a story.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's an advocacy type of document almost. I think we need to get, we need to determine a way to have that the board is getting, and the public is getting, and everyone is getting a very accurate picture, as accurate as possible. And I'm a little worried about some of the little comments that are in here that reflect a sort of a policy. You know, this should be like a financial document. And with all these little comments here, it says school budgets should be managed with a great deal of conservatism over the next few years. Is that a state requirement, or is that a policy determination?
Well, here's the real answer to John's question, is that at the end of the year, it's saying we should be at 1.1. We got a lot of one-time money. I wasn't here for all of that. I don't know how you sorted out all that stuff.
It's really
But-
dessert.
Yeah, you're right, and so you put it there. So at the end of the year, where do we come out? Are we near 1.1, or are we 2.1? Are we 1.8? Are we 800,000? So at the end of the year, where did we come out based on our assumptions and predictions? That will determine what happens in 17-18. If that number gets higher at the end of this year instead of 1.1, then 17-18 look better and 18-19 look better. But this budget is just like every other budget I've ever seen. It's based on only one thing. It's not what you think, it's not what you hope, it's not what you'd like to see. It's based on what you actually know at this point. What we know at this point is that we're gonna be spending more over the next couple years, and we don't know about any one-time revenue. We know stirs and purrs is going up. We know what the COLA rate is supposed to be. We know that COLA's less than the stirs and purrs increase is. And hopefully there'll be some one-time money. But there's so many other variables. We're not fully funded through LCFF. So if the state's economy picks up, they're gonna get us closer to 100% of what we're supposed to be. No district in California is at 100%. We're all at the same percentage. But if that happens, if the economy picks up, LCFF funding gets better. If the economy's better, your taxable value's better. If more people are working, maybe our ADA goes up. Those are all guesswork right now. But if you're looking at our ADA, I mean, this is the first year in how many years our ADA went up?
What is our ADA status right now?
I don't
I think
remember.
it was
the
based
number.
on 1,410.
Yeah,
And how are we holding with that?
actually very well. Yeah, actually, I believe we were up like 5 from our initial. But the reality is, if you're a business manager, you always budget on conservative, what if the roof falls in? This is based on what do we know? And we know that we're not in a position to go crazy. We're also not in a position to run out and go replace facilities. You know, we know we're in a district. I've been to every single district we compete against now. Our facilities are less than every school we compete against, including small schools like Potter Valley, including Covelo. They have nicer facilities. So we got facility issues. So let's not just talk about teacher contracts when we're talking about money. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we gotta fund. We gotta fund facilities. We gotta fund our classified staff. I mean, there's a whole bunch of issues, but we know we can do business like we're doing business right now for the next 2 years without having an issue. Now, if we get more money, it makes it easier.
One thing, when I talk about, I'm not talking necessarily about credibility of the budget for negotiations. You know, to increase or decrease our offer, although we should have a pretty good idea where we are before we make a final decision. But I personally believe that we have a very dedicated group of employees here in this district, and if we have real numbers that has credibility, I think that we can say, you know, here's how much we have available for negotiations, and if it's believable, I think we can factor in things like the facilities upgrades, the things we need, because these are people who work inside the facilities, and they know the needs just as well as the administration, or to a lesser extent the board. So I think that, you know, I guess what I'd like to see is just, and I have every expectation that we're moving in that direction, but I'm not sure that we've been there. And I'd like to see a little more, you know, I'd like to, you know, a year from now, John, come here and say, you know, we saw what you did last year in your financial reports, and we have some confidence in them. We're very suspicious, but we have some confidence that we didn't have before.
And what this is showing you is that we are calculating out here steps increases that cost more. We're calculating out going to the $15 an hour rule. We're calculating stirs and PERS increases. That's reflected in 17-18 and in the 18-19 budget already. The only thing that's not calculated in 17-18 and 18-19, what we're doing, is right now we're doing 100% of the employee's contribution for healthcare. That is not reflected in 17 and 18, because in the contract it was only this year. But all of the increases that we have projected out are incorporated in this number. Stirs and PERS included. COLA offsetting that is included in this. But it's all we know right now. We don't know what the economy is going to be like. We don't know if there's one-time money. We don't know if we're going to get an elementary counseling grant, which we got a couple years ago for $450,000. We know we don't have that next year. So when revenue goes down, $450,000 of the revenue going down is the elementary counseling grant ran out. So there's $450,000 out the door. So revenue's always going to come and go, but I think when we say we're going to try and end at 1.1, in June, how did we do? Are we at 1.1? Because then you know we're on track.
And we ended at 1.3 last year, so that's realistic.
Yeah. And the fund balance, you know, that's always a magic number. 3 is the absolute minimum. The higher the number, the better the business manager feels. The lower the number, the better the union feels. So you as a board just have to kind of realize that it's part of your cash flow issue. You can't be too low to not have anything in reserve. So we're at 7.1 to 2. As you look through there, you can see it, 7.1, 7.4, 7.2. We're maintaining that fund balance. This budget projection maintains that 7% fund balance. It also maintains a slightly higher amount to put into facility. Because unlike places like St. Helena, who don't have to put in those kind of budget numbers to maintain their facility, because they're just cleaning in their buildings, they're not fixing and repairing.
Yeah.
You know, we know we're gonna have fixes and repairs. And so our number we put on there is 3% is what your minimum is. We're around 6, because we know we're gonna have that. And so you have to just bear all those things in mind. And, you know, I think the good news is that I have highlighted in orange on mine, positive. That's what we are, we're positive. You know, we're not walking into negotiations going, oh, you guys gotta take a pay cut. We're not there. We're not walking into it saying, oh my God, the sky's falling, we're gonna have to lay people off. We're not there.
So do these projections build in these stirs increases?
Yes, they do. That's why the deficit is going away quickly. Because remember, there's no additional increase in revenue that we know of. She kept the enrollment flat. She figured in COLA. She put in stirs and PERS. She put in our scale, because we have a sliding scale with the classified staff about how we're gonna get to $15 an hour. and we're eliminating categories each year as we go. And we've budgeted in staff step increases. You know, steps are 240 to 250 next year.
So
That's budgeted in here.
the 15 is the California minimum wage? And
Yes.
it's different than the national minimum
Right.
wage?
Yes. California adopted the $15 minimum wage, and it's gonna be a real struggle, because we have people who are, I don't know, low 10, and there's gonna be a lot of transition in that group.
Uh-huh.
In fact, it would eliminate, we have classified, Dan, help me with the numbers, it's 7 to 30, is that the number for classifieds? The type of position they hold and the line item?
Yeah.
It's gonna eliminate like categories 7 through 11 this year, because their wage would have to be higher than what was even there. But we'll work that out. I mean, we know that's coming. And so being known is part of the value. You know, they didn't drop it on us and say, hey, next year everybody's at 15. It's a graduated progress. And so we have the next 5 years charted out on the pay scale, how we're gonna get to those thresholds.
How vulnerable are we to upturns and downturns in the economy? In other words, the percent of funding is at some level, you know, like X level. Is there any kind of a way to follow that, like you follow a stock, you know, to check it each month?
It's really kind of easy, because if the state's economy is downturned, there's less, if you think of the state government as a pie, 100% of their budget, X percent goes to schools. Well, if they bring in less, that percent they put off to schools is more. So who are they gonna shortchange? Are they gonna shortchange schools? Are they gonna shortchange roads? Are they gonna shortchange the prison system? They have to make that decision. Sometimes it's they cut everybody a little bit. Sometimes, I can tell you in the state of Michigan what they did, they stopped fixing roads. You need four-wheel drive practically to get around town. But the reality is they only have so much money. We are totally dependent on the state of California to fund our school. We're not Mendocino, where property value is gonna bail us out. Whatever we raise in property value goes to Sacramento, and then they redistribute the money and give us what we're entitled to per student. In Mendocino, they generate the money and it stays there. It doesn't go.
John, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, you know, with your question about the downturn of the economy for California, you gotta remember that a couple of years ago, they put in that rainy day fund. And that is to kind of smooth the waters if our economy does tank. You know, it doesn't look like that, and they aren't using it, but, you know, there is that buffer that we've created in the last couple of years. You probably could talk more about it, but that's the kind of gives some stability to future forecasting. I guess my question with Prop 55, or is that taken into consideration
Yes.
in this?
Yeah,
And
and
then
one of the
also,
things-
are retirees considered?
Yes, they're in here as well.
Yeah, what you need to remember about Prop 55 too, John, is that in year 18, 19, one of the things drop off in funding, there's no more sales tax as part of 55.
Right.
So if you look at our revenue projection from that, we lose 800,000 in 18, 19 because of that property, or that sales tax going off. Because then 55 is only on the 250,000 people, and what's the other one?
500 for a couple.
Well, no, there's another person, there's another taxing part in that. There are 3 taxes that go with 55. And it's the over 250,000.
Right, income tax.
There's something else, another tax that stays, but the sales tax part of that goes off. And so it's gonna cut our money in about half. Now,
Well-
will they reinstate it? Will they make it up somewhere else? Maybe. Will they use the rainy day fund? I hope so. I hope they keep us whole, but we don't know that now, so you wouldn't budget on, you budget on known now when you predict.
Well, I'll check on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is, and I believe Tanya has the info, she can send it to you. We get a printout from them and it says, here's your predicted amount for the next years, and the dropping off of the sales tax was pretty significant for us.
Can you talk a little bit about restricted versus unrestricted in terms of, when we look at the budget, it looks like we are spending way over what we receive in restricted funds.
Sure.
So why do we do that?
Well, I'll give you an example, and correct me if I'm in, but about 200,000 of it is food service, where we have to put money into food service. We have to go from unrestricted into restricted, because it costs more to do food service than we get.
Is this basically, we're making up for unfunded mandates?
Unfunded mandates and programs that we offer that the restricted amount isn't enough to run the program. Title I's a good example. We do a whole lot of stuff with Title I in funding employees, but it doesn't cover everything. And so you do have to take your unrestricted funds, if you're gonna do those, and cover them. Is that a good analogy?
Yeah, that's fair, especially the child nutrition one. And that's common throughout the state. Very few like cafeteria funds, very few are self-sufficient. They almost always encroach on the general fund. That's very, very typical.
Right, and so my question when I hear that is, it's 200,000 a year out of unrestricted, we gotta put in restricted to keep food service solvent, is, okay, well, how can we save money in food service? Well, I can give you one example that high school kids don't like. That's called closed campus. Okay, I can get, the other thing I look at is when we do after-school things. We have a really nice after-school feeding thing like at Bechtel. Okay, however, all those are reimbursables. So you have to know what you're looking at in food service to know, is it a good thing or is it not a good thing? But the reality is, we spend a lot of money in food service, just like, I've never been in a school district where the food service was even close to positive. And it's the quality of the program you wanna have and the services you wanna offer. And, again, we're not gonna go without food service. We're not gonna tell kids, sorry, we're only gonna have peanut butter and jelly this month. And we're gonna provide a good food service program. But it's gonna cost us a couple $100,000 out of unrestricted to do it.
Paul?
Just about for food service, do the salaries, et cetera, are they coming out of the food service budget of the food service employees?
Everything we can possibly charge the food service we do, even the fact that there's let's not call it administrative fee, what do they call it?
Indirect costs?
Indirect cost, they call it. I call it administrative fee, but it's, you can charge for electricity, you can do all kinds of stuff. Any creative way we can figure out how to put something towards food service, because the more we put towards it, we might get reimbursed more. It's kind of, it's one of those things where, is the lunch countable, is it not countable? If you want kids to eat lunch, we could get all the kids to eat lunch if we opened up a Burger King and gave them all Burger King, but the problem is nobody'd be free and reduced because none of the lunches qualify.
Yeah.
And so,
And so when their hours, et cetera, are increased, that also has to come out of the food service budget then, right? When
It
they're lots of
does.
employment.
It does, it depends if you increase them to do something that's a reimbursable, then you're helping yourself. So if you increase their hours a half hour for a whole group, for example, the brunch and lunch thing like at Bechtel, when we do a breakfast and we do a brunch, well, we increase them a half hour of time, the employees, but we also spiked our reimbursable count. And so that more than covered the half hour at a time.
Okay, and so then my only other question about just this is that, so when an employee works 10 months, or when they work 12, are 12 or 10 reimbursable? Or is it only certain months, a certain number of months are reimbursable for a food program?
Well,
I
it
mean,
comes
if you
down
figure
to,
it-
It comes down to feeding kids.
Right.
If you're not feeding kids, then their 2 months that they're not is our cost. But there are districts who do summer feeding programs, and you have to apply for that. And you actually get reimbursed quite nicely for that. And so I came from a district that had a summer feeding, we had a summer school program, and they fed the kids at noon. In fact, any kid in town could come at noon.
We do that.
Yeah.
We do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be interested in looking at what we can do at the high school though, as far as lunch goes.
Yeah.
I
And
think
it-
it would be worthwhile.
Yeah, and again, closed campus is one of those things that high school kids don't like to hear about, but it's safety, it's health of the food they eat. It's also, you know, potential revenue for us walking down the street. So, you know, those are issues. You as a board kind of have to sort that out. For me, I'm crystal clear on open campus, closed campus.
Are we gonna look at that at some point?
I think you should.
What is it, we went to,
Ninth
close,
and 10th.
9th and 10th closed campus, and, maybe we could have a report from, you know, a written report, how that's going and what would involve,
Yeah.
and what are the advantages and disadvantages
Sure.
of extending it to the entire campus.
And Christie has a mountain of data. How many lunch counts, how many countables. I mean, she can tell you how many people took chocolate milk on Tuesday. I mean, everything she does is all documented. I mean, there's no error because everything is a potential reimbursable. But, yeah, and again, that's not gonna solve 200,000. We're not gonna close campus and get 200,000 back in revenue. Because there's gonna be more expenses with that as well, because we gotta prepare more food now. So, it's a cost benefit. What would be the cost benefit of it? And again, the other wild card, not to get caught on off campus and on campus, but how many kids would bring their lunch compared to how many would eat hot lunch? So, there's a lot of issues, but food service is one of our big ones.
So, Paula, do you have another
I have
comment?
just one more question, not on food service though. And the interim report, it shows on the second page, or whatever, it's the 2016-17 interim report general fund. And it's a multi-year projection for unrestricted and restricted. It was pretty close to the front of the whole thing. You know, it shows that the total available reserves by percent is like 12.86. But they figured that but it is projected that in 3 years it will drop to 7.76. And that's something I was real curious about because the auditor's report doesn't reflect that. It just reflects a 7-something every single year, right?
Paula, where are you looking?
Where are you looking?
This page, at the bottom it says 11/30/16 at 112. It's not very far from the very.
Are you on the auditor stuff, or?
No, I'm.
Can you show us what it looked like? Okay.
It's like it's form MYTI.
We should number these pages, you know,
Wouldn't that be
consecutively.
easier? But this is number 2 of 3,
So there's,
although it doesn't say that.
every document has a page too.
This is in the actual district certification.
Yeah, it says the,
What's the title at the
Oh,
top?
here we go. Here's where she's at.
216 first
She's in
interim.
these actual forms.
It's way at the beginning.
Yeah.
Here is the, oh,
Something like
okay.
that?
Yeah, there you go. You guys have it too. Do you want to see what
I'm
it
sure
looks
we've got it,
like?
I'm just trying to get.
No,
the
I mean,
you
we
want.
want to see what it looks like.
Yeah, I want to see what it looks like, because I
It was
still
really
haven't
close to
found
the
it.
end of when they first.
Am I at the right place?
I think so, yeah, because that's where it switches over.
Okay.
I just didn't understand why the switch was so big. And then the deal about retirees, you said that.
Paula, thank you.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
Lori. Here.
Which one is it?
No, it looks sort of like,
It looks like that.
yeah. No, it's a little bit different. It's closer to the beginning. Well, doesn't it say restricted and unrestricted at the top? Or maybe I'm confused.
Oh, no, it was that one right there.
This?
Yeah, it looks
No,
like
it
this
says
one.
Unrestricted except
Yeah, but look at,
for-
look at the number, the total numbers that are on the page.
See the page. It's the same one you've got.
So you're really.
All right.
See, it just says right there. Okay, and so I just didn't understand such a huge discrepancy.
It's going, this is 17.
So when John talked about the
Does that make sense?
When John talked about retirees, I didn't know
This
if you were
is
talking
This
about
number is
like the
basically
cost they are to the district,
down,
because
yeah, go down.
retirees cost you money. Or if you were talking about, or if he were talking about how a retired person gets to leave maybe at 70 grand a year and the new one taking their place comes in at 40. Because that's a discrepancy also of money that you're gonna notice. So I didn't know which retiree, I guess I should have just whispered, but I didn't know which retiree question you were asking when you said, well, is the retirees in there, like how much we cost? Or the discrepancy in salaries when you go to rehire?
No, what's in here.
She projected, I think, 35,000 for retiree,
Well-
the savings for retirees.
Right. There's some projection for that, but not much, because we don't know that number. That's a total unknown, who's gonna retire. We do have a legacy cost as a district for people who are already retired.
Right,
That's in here.
okay,
We're noting that 400,000 every year in cost.
as your cost, right?
Yeah. So, we don't have that number,
But
because
you
we don't
don't
know how
have
many.
the off balance of what you gained from it.
Right.
Oh, okay. And then the other is just why that discrepancy looks so huge here and didn't seem to show up in the.
Paul, if you take a look at the revenues on the left-hand side, there's 2 pages there.
Right,
If you take a look at the revenues, we're talking 14 million versus the actual revenues are around 18 million.
right.
So I'm positive this is just general fund, unrestricted. And the next couple of pages over, you'll find the restricted stuff.
Oh, okay. And so that's why, even though it says unrestricted, restricted, it's not combining them together?
I don't believe it's combining them
No.
together. I think the front stuff where she's got she shows the reserves, where it's all bundled together, gives you a different percentage, obviously.
Right. Oh, okay.
John?
That follows that.
No, I'm done.
Okay, yeah, I did find in the multi-year projection assumptions that there is a minimum of $30,000 considered for the savings for retirees.
Uh-huh.
And, my understanding, and so this is another way that we create this story, is that my understanding is there's at least 4 people retiring this year in our district, and if they're each saving 30 to 40,000, that's a huge savings for the district. The other thing is that comment about the sales tax, when we were talking about whether to support Prop 55, the business manager said that we were getting about $800,000 or $900,000 from the Prop 30 money. So it's interesting to hear that this little tweak of the sales tax, which I hadn't really heard that was going to affect how much districts are getting, is going to create this $800,000 deficit in our revenue. And so it's just another one of those things that we will check out, and the story will be clearer. But certainly some of these projections are kind of like status quo projections.
Yeah, and it's a snapshot of where we're at that time. Just like, we don't know how many people are gonna retire. But we do know that we have to spend $400,000 a year for people who have already retired.
John, in the back of this, you'll find that she lists all the various assumptions that they make.
Right, that's what I was going on.
And I think maybe probably an interesting exercise might be for you to go down through each of those assumptions and make a rebuttal to those. For example, retirement. And I agree with you. If 4 people retired, theoretically, you should save at least $100,000. So take that, make that adjustment there, and then look at the other assumptions that she makes also. For example, is ADA going to rise? Is it going to go down? Is it going to stay the same? You could throw in what you think is going to be accurate or reasonably accurate, whatever assumption you would consider, and be interesting to see how different they are. And then hopefully we can kind of look at those and go, yeah, maybe we're being too conservative, or maybe we're not being conservative enough in some areas. But I'd certainly welcome that debate as to where we're being too conservative and where we're not.
Another way of approaching that is to look at the history of what we've had and see when it's been stated that we're going to have state takeover, and then we end up with $2 million over. That's the proof in the pudding.
Well, not necessarily, as, I can speak to a little bit of that, only because I was closer to the fire. As an example, at the beginning of that year, we had no idea that we were gonna receive over $700,000 in one-time money. And at one point, I got a phone call telling us that we were gonna receive around 400,000, and then a few weeks later, it was up to 700,000. Again, this is well after the budget had been adopted. In addition to that, we were planning to spend $300,000 on school buses, and we nixed that. Just those two items alone account for $1 million of that change. Both of those items, both of those items were not in the, I should say, the school bus issue was in the budget. We were planning to spend those monies, and that one line item, again, makes a swing of $600,000. And then, of course, receiving $700,000 in money we had no way to anticipate, makes up again for $1 million of that. So.
Right, but at the same time, we did have $2 million over, when it was stated just in the springtime that we were deficit spending, we were, gonna be negative, all that stuff, right? So-
We would have known that from the prior budget, so I don't know that that's accurate.
I don't think we were supposed to be having deficit spending then, but we were going to be deficit spending the next year, right?
Well,
I was hearing that we were deficit spending, and it alarmed me, because I felt that I had failed in not understanding the year before, and I thought there was a fundamental flaw in the way that this board processes that information. We got the budget on a Friday before a Wednesday board meeting, and oftentimes it was, we need to get this done.
Mhm.
The interim report always needed to be done, approved and sent off the next day. And I think we need to, I'd like to see us building this budget a little more transparently this spring. Now, we have a problem. Our finance director is leaving, and so, it's a big blow to that process. We might get somebody else in, we might not. But I certainly think that this board does two things that are very important. The rest of the stuff isn't that important. We set the financial policy and we put the administration in place. And those are our two main functions. And I think we've done a good job putting administration in place, but I think we need now to do a good job in understanding the financial policy, and so that the board is making policy decisions with people having, the ability to have some input. And I think Alex is absolutely right. I mean, the assumptions, the first page of this document says, it's all based on assumptions. And you found the assumptions, and I think Alex is right. That's what we should be arguing over, not these spreadsheets, because I don't understand them, but I do understand assumptions. And I think that's where we ought to be determining, because I see words in here that we've got to be conservative because of this is going to happen, and that's a policy decision, how conservative we are. And that policy decision is reflected in those assumptions. And so that's you can't change, ADA, how much kids you get per ADA. You can't change how much you get, how much it costs to pay the PG&E bill. But you can massage the assumptions. And if the assumptions are so conservative that they're not providing a real view, then I think, or if they're too, certainly you wouldn't want to say, we think we're going to have 1,700 ADA next year, and we got lots of money to spend. So we have to be, I think we should, instead of trying to be conservative or liberal, we should be trying to really do I'd like to see a forecast instead of an assumption. And I think we can do a little bit more forecasting. And this interim budget starts off by saying, we're not doing any forecasting here, we're operating off of these assumptions. And I think that's where the crux is. And I think we should spend some time, every time this comes up, the second interim, we should be all over those assumptions, trying to figure out whether they're, whether they're too conservative or too liberal, or, they're, and I think that's where our focus ought to be. We're getting the whole thing into a clearer picture, but I sure would like to see us, be talking from one set of numbers in a couple of months.
And from a fiscal policy standpoint, I'm a firm believer that the money that goes into salaries and benefits has to be money that is sustainable, not one-time funds. I can see occasions where you can utilize one-time funds for a very short, limited period of time. But again, if we're gonna use one-time funds, for example, to fund salaries and benefits, and then they don't show up for a couple of years, then we've shot ourselves in the foot, and no one's gonna do well. So again, we have to find a way to make sure that salaries and benefits and ongoing costs are always dealt with money that we know is going to be there.
Well, and I think what I would really like to see is, I realize that the WTA is not always gonna agree with how we're spending the money, but I would like for there to be confidence that our budget does, reflect what we truly have. I would like you guys to look at it and, not feel like we are trying to fake the numbers, because I feel like that's what's coming across, that you think we aren't trying to present the correct numbers. So I would like to have it so at least there's some confidence on your guys' side, so you can come, to the table for negotiations as well with a good feeling as far as what our numbers really are. So at least everything's being approached from a single set of numbers with confidence.
Certainly.
And we're not gonna get there tonight, but I think we're gonna get there soon, because I think there's a commitment that to pay just a little bit more attention than the board is playing. And I think that discussion tonight has been very positive in moving that process forward. And I think we've had a much more frank discussion about the budget and the finances than we've ever had in the last couple of years. And so I think it was a good discussion tonight.
Can I bring my expert every time?
Yes, yes. It was I'm very gratified that we had the auditor here to answer questions about the audit. I have a little bit more experience in understanding of audits than I do these interim reports, but I thought that was very valuable.
And my basic premise is, in June, how close did we get to the 1.1 we say we're gonna have?
And we should have, and when we get to second interim, what we're projecting then will be,
Right.
So we should remember that number, because, that's what we're testing.
Yeah, your next
Our
report will
card.
have first interim, second interim, it'll show the change. And so, yeah, I'm
So-
hoping that number grows.
So we're looking for, is this an approval of the first, this is basically a budget adjustment, so
Right,
it requires
exactly. That's it.
a motion for
One of
approval.
several.
We have the first and second.
We do?
Mhm.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I want to talk about one other issue here, and you've made a couple of comments with respect to the comments by our CFO in here. As an example, so the district has improved the fiscal stability, however, it cannot maintain the current level of spending. The ending fund balance is being depleted, contributions to programs are increasing, with carryovers being expended, and ongoing increased PERS, STIRS in both out years are not being covered by any increased to revenues. The district needs to formulate a plan to address these ongoing issues. I agree with a little bit of what you've said with respect to these comments, but I'm also a firm believer that we hire our CFO for a reason. That individual is supposed to be the expert in these particular matters. I would think that the CFO would not be doing us justice if the individual did not at least provide some sort of warning for where we might be missing the boat on the budget. I agree, we do set fiscal policy, But I look at this as, we hear from our superintendent with respect to the overall operation of our district, but from a financial standpoint, I think he would even agree that he's not the expert, and that we have to rely on that expert that we hire for that purpose. Though we may not always agree with our CFO's commentary, I think it is, I think it's valuable commentary, and it brings into focus the potential for failure if we don't address the issues. And I understand that the assumptions that are in here are exactly that, they're assumptions. But they're based, I know that they're based on conservative values that one or more of us may not necessarily agree with. But they're there for a purpose, and we have to at least acknowledge that.
I agree with you, Ally. My comment, I don't think, is so much that we shouldn't hear from the CFO on her assumptions and the premise of her outlook. But I think that we should have a document that has numbers in it, and then have a separate document that says, I'm your CFO, the sky's falling in, and here's my plan to fix it. Because it doesn't do much to say, you've got to do something about spending, and just have a little comment, so that if something does go wrong, say, well, see, I told you, it says right here on page 78 that you have to reduce spending. I think that's a separate function, and I think that it's revealing when you read these little comments, the editorial comments, that then you have a sieve for the assumptions at the back. I mean, there's a little bit of honesty here. Basically saying, I'm being conservative as heck, and every other page is a little, I'm being as conservative as heck, and then you have some assumptions. And
I can agree with the summary at the end, rather than them being kind of interspersed throughout the document.
or a separate document, maybe even a separate report from the CFO, because I'd kind of like to see, saying, to hear, say, you've got to reduce spending, and our plan, tentative plan for next year to reduce spending is to take a look at reducing, board salaries, or whatever it is.
They're out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah, but remember, we haven't had any money to be spending, for one thing, for quite some time, and we did nothing but take away programs. So, and it's a different time for our financial picture for the district than we had in a very, very long time.
Could you weigh in on the commentary that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think your commentary is no different than any other district. Like I think I said, I was up there, it's always that balance between, you want to make sure you don't have too high a reserve, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where you might be in trouble if some things change, right?
More specifically, is it common for CFOs in school districts to make that kind of commentary throughout a budget?
Under the descriptions.
I know what I usually see, because I'm not always at the meetings. I usually read the board minutes. I know that they make the commentary, whether they have it in there or not, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Or whether it's just verbal.
Or if you meet with the CFO on a regular basis, you would get the personal commentary.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I'm not sure though if I've never really seen a document look like that, so.
From my perspective, I would rather that commentary not be just limited to a verbal to the individuals of the board that actually ask her. I would rather that commentary to be public. It needs to be public.
And available to everybody.
Yes.
But I do like the idea of a separate, here's my assessment and recommendations document versus the little comments throughout.
That makes more sense to me as well.
Yeah.
And the reason we talk a lot about contract when we talk about budgets is the bulk of our expenses go to benefits and employment of people. Very little comparatively is going to the other. However, that's your discretionary. So regardless of what we do contractually, we can provide what we agreed to in the contract. But our facility problems didn't go away. You didn't buy a bus. We still have buses that are old, and so that's the real issue in budget. is you have really a limited amount of discretionary spending of what you're doing. You have contractual obligations that are a known entity, you know what they're gonna cost. And so you have to balance that out.
We even at one point with the reserve, we've never even had it that high for I don't know how long of putting in, where we actually weighed the difference of if we were fined and did not put any reserve in, if that would have been cheaper, or was it legal? You know, I mean, it's like a huge different picture of what we're working with.
I would be very concerned if we were at the minimums in both reserves.
Mhm.
I would be very concerned.
Which is where we were at.
Right.
Except for
And
years.
It was
yeah.
nice to hear where we're at compared to other districts, and what the averages are, cause
Yeah.
I think that was something I didn't know
Yes.
before. You know, we knew that some schools were above 3, but not a good idea of where they usually sit, so thank you for that.
And I'm optimistic that I know we can cover our known expenses,
Mhm.
and I think we can start to address some of our concerns that are things that we know are happening. I mean, we had to fix a gym roof. You know, I wish we didn't have to spend $100,000 on a roof, but we have a multi-million-dollar problem if we don't. And so, you know, that's a nice to do. Unfortunately, it's also a need to do. So.
All right, so we've had quite a bit of discussion. Do we have a motion and a second?
We do.
Let's just move forward to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, weren't we supposed to have election of officers tonight?
Yes, we were.
Yes.
Item 4.
Oh, is it on this revised?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I had the wrong agenda in front of me. So, this is an annual organizational meeting. The first item of the business is election of board president. Do we have any nominations?
If you're willing, I'll nominate you.
I think that's a great idea.
I'd be willing to do it one more year.
I would second that.
Okay. Do we have any nominations for a board clerk?
I would be happy to nominate our existing board clerk.
Why are you nominating some people today?
Well, it seems to be working
I'm
just
trying to-
right.
I'm trying to duck is what I'm trying to do.
I'm right behind him there, so. But
You've
that
done
works
such a
for
fine
you.
job.
Yeah,
This time was
I'd second that.
papers well.
Are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm
She came in right after last December, and said, well, what does the board clerk do? She's surprised to see how important a position it is.
Would you second that?
Yes.
So, what about appointment of board secretary? That's you, right?
It is.
Well,
I nominate.
sort of.
Well, the board secretary is
By
basically
proxy,
the
it's
one
really
who
Trina.
affirms that the district
That
is.
is correct.
Okay. So, we have,
I would make it, if I may further, I would move that the nominations be closed.
Do we have a second on the board secretary? Thank you.
okay. Can we just take all three at once in one group?
I would.
Okay. Do we have any public comment? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, we now have public comments, reading from the right agenda. Public comments for items not on the agenda? Paul?
Now, I'm just questioning if you all received my email and passed one on to Georgiana, because I didn't have her email.
Yes, I got it.
Oh, okay, good, thanks.
I passed it along. We should have our email addresses on the webpage, aren't they there?
I'm sort of.
They are there.
Technologically
there.
limited, so I just take from what I
I
have
was
and
gonna say,
pushed it
I'm
in
pretty
all
sure I
this
have
book.
them there.
Okay,
They are.
good. Superintendent comments?
Just that we're up and running in winter sports, and the girls' team is doing very well. The boys' team's getting better. You would have missed a classic basketball game last night. We lost in double overtime to Upper Lake, banking in 3-pointers at the end of the game. It was really nice. I went with the Sherwood kids today to, what is the?
Northbrook?
Northbrook. Fabulous.
What to say?
Yeah, they sang Christmas carols, and probably the best part of it wasn't that they sang Christmas carols. The teachers had them go afterwards and introduce themselves to the residents and go up and talk to them. It was just awesome, awesome. Brookside's caroling away today, so we're kind of getting in the Christmas spirit. I think people are looking forward to a break.
Okay, board comments, Lori?
No.
Good
night, everyone.
I don't have any. What about George?
Becker Grove Band, I thought that, Mr. Olds did a very good job. They had their first
Oh,
winter
yeah.
concert. I'll have to say, I was a little disappointed that there was no decorations in the gym though, or in the cafeteria. They didn't decorate at all, but the concert went really well. He's doing a great job.
Would there be a huge uproar if we moved that to the auditorium at the high school?
There were a lot of people that, I don't know, I was standing well in the
Just
back with
because
a lot
of
of people.
seating and
It-
acoustics and.
I think it might be better, and I think it might be better for the students too. Just, you know, something other than playing in the cafeteria. But there were a
Well,
decent
'cause
amount of people
they
that
had to
had
wait
no
in the
seats.
cafeteria. We could have staged them in a back room
Right.
before they come out, but I didn't wanna move them off their site. But
No, I
now that
think-
I've seen one, it's pretty crowded.
It is. I think it would be good to move them.
I passed it, but I did have one comment, and that is that the Willits Weekly has put in a new quarterly section called the Wolverine. I don't know if you've seen it.
Loved reading about you.
Well, I was surprised.
I said, wait, what's that? What? You know?
They reprinted a story from 1967, but
Exactly.
you know, there's a profile of teacher, Mr. Oles, that's what they think. And and it's a really great service
It
that
is. It's fun.
you know for getting the schools in front of the public. I was, you know, this is the second one, I think, and I was just tickled to see
Yeah.
that.
It's been out of existence for quite a while.
Well, I was
They brought it back.
Yeah, the Wolverine was the name of our school newspaper, and when I was in high school, we were a regional football power, and we were a highly ranked school newspaper.
What I wanna know is how did the yearbook get its name?
Lost in, it's been
Mistletoe?
mistletoe since the 30s, you know, I mean, I've seen,
Isn't that something?
I haven't connected the dots on that one yet.
It grows wild around here.
I think that's something for the newspapers to investigate.
That was a compliment.
Dan?
About the comment about moving the Brookside kids maybe to the auditorium.
No, Bechtel.
Oh, Bechtel?
Yeah, for their band concert.
Yeah, the other night, we moved the Bechtel basketball to the big gym here
Right.
because we had an issue with the school. And I was down here and I talked to some kids and said, how's it feel to be at the big school? And they're like, hey, this is kinda cool, you know, so it is kind of a little treat
Yeah.
for them to go to a bigger venue and experience it,
Mhm.
so. It was kinda cool to see that, and they took very good care of the facilities when they were here too. It was very nicely left in the morning, so.
Thank you. Alex?
I mean, other than just a brief comment with respect to the way I view negotiations and the budget and so forth, we have to rely on the CFO and the budget documents for us to make decisions when it comes down to what we're gonna approve with respect to wages, benefits, whether we're gonna spend money on facilities and so forth. That said, I really do want the budget to reflect what's actually there, to the best of our ability. And those assumptions that we've talked about, whether they be conservative or liberal or somewhere in between, those need to be as reasonably accurate as we can actually make them be. So I'm hoping that we can develop some budget workshops that help us to take a stronger role in the development of the budget, to include hopefully CSEA and the teachers union as well. So, but we can only make decisions based on what we've got in front of us. And if it's accurate, hopefully we make accurate decisions. But if it's not, it's pretty hard. And then when we receive things like those one-time monies after the fact, we can't really be held responsible for that. It's not something that we had control over at the time. As much as I would like to say, you know, I've said it time and time again, I think that especially beginning teachers here, they're paid way too little. The only benefit we can really roll back on is we got really good benefits. But I really want to be able to find a way to provide the most that we can for the employees that we have here, and balance what we have with respect to facilities. But I think our biggest asset has always been the people, and it will always be the people that work here. Just that simple. That's part of the reason, like, for example, I didn't want the calendar is a classic example. You're telling me 75% of your membership wants this calendar to look like something different. I want to find a way to accommodate. My goal here is to find ways to say yes, not look for reasons to say no. And that's the reason why I was striking for a compromise with respect to doing it one more year and hopefully getting more information. But bottom line is the budget needs to be as absolutely transparent as it can possibly be. And it needs to be understandable. And hopefully we can do a better job with that.
Cynthia?
Well, I think the audit findings are, well handled, and it gives us a better financial picture for our district, which I like working from. I think the budget is a really tricky to understand. It is a snapshot, it is assumptions, it is a fluid piece. They're projecting, they seem to me to always be conservative people in the way they work and the way they project things. Tanya, I think, was instrumental in clarifying our monies and our accounting standards. And I think it's imperative that we keep working at the goal that we're talking about, of being transparent. But I do see the district in general working that way. We keep getting better and better and better. So as a board, I feel that's our role, to continue that and to keep putting that pressure on. And ideally, I would love for the tables to come for negotiation that we all agree on the same picture that we're working from. I think it would be huge if we could accomplish that. And I'd love to see that. I'm getting a lot of continued feedback about the Chromebooks, how much they're enjoying that and how great that has been. I heard a lot about Hot Winter's Night, which was really great too for the community. I've also heard from Sherwood and different places of how happy everyone's doing, and just good things that are happening in their schools in general, which I think is really exciting feedback to be getting, because it seems like I ran through about 6 months of just getting negative calls. So I think it's really neat to be getting some positive feedback from all different areas in the district, and I think that's good. I'm a little worried about not having a financial officer. That makes me uncomfortable when we've been going forward like we've been doing, and that bothers me. That's a big part of our picture.
Let me help you with that. I can help ease a little bit of your stress, because I'm the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
Careful.
Well, that helps.
I have Tanya on basically a hourly contractual item with her, is that she is going to, on every Tuesday, every Thursday, she's going to look at what we've been doing, make sure our transfers are in place.
Oh, nice.
Saturday, Sunday, she said she's totally available to come in and meet with me and go through stuff. So Tanya has agreed to work with me until we're transitioned.
Nice.
And so.
Well, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously she's not gonna be making big financial decisions. She's gonna be making sure we're doing what we're supposed to correctly. And I'm pretty confident that we can easily make it through February in our current status with her help.
Sounds good.
She's committed to do that, and very amicable split. It's a good opportunity for her, but she also doesn't want to leave us hanging.
Are we getting any interested people?
Yes.
Any qualified interested people?
Yeah, I have 2 people who are very qualified.
Nice
right
to
now.
hear. Oh, good.
And so
Okay.
I'm very pleased about both of them. Both have referenced out very well already.
That's good to hear then.
One thing I would like to just say that I think went right tonight is that I think it's a good idea to have the audit presentation and the first interim at the same meeting.
Yeah.
And because they really sort of do belong to each other. where have we been, where are we going?
Right. And I would say that I would like to always have the auditor. Because again, you can ask them anything.
Is that, do we pick up his cost traveling up here, or is that
It's
part of
part
the
of our
overall?
deal with
big
them.
package.
They always offer to present. They've always offered
Right.
to present. We've just apparently
We
never
declined
taken
them.
advantage. I've never not had them present.
Okay,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
There you go.
all in favor?
Uh,
Aye.